Welcome to this tactical analysis of the Wolfsburg versus Chelsea match in the UEFA Women's Champions League. This is the final match day and a day filled with drama. If you enjoy the videos, please give them a like, share them on social media and consider subscribing. With that, let's get into the tactics. So we're going to start with Wolfsburg's deep build-up. Of the two teams, Wolfsburg was considerably more comfortable and adept at building up out of the back, especially before G came on for Chelsea just before the second half. I'd say predominantly Wolfsburg built up in a 2-4-2-2. Please have a look in the description as well as the comments down below for my complete tactical summary. So they have this 2-4-2-2 deep where you have Latvine and Oberdorf, the centre defensive midfielders in this shape. They were really flexible positionally and helped the team to be able to evade Chelsea's narrow press. So Chelsea tried a number of different shapes during their press, but Wolfsburg were able to punish Chelsea's narrowness in their press, as well as also how aggressive Chelsea's wing-backs were, predominantly with switches. In this case, we're going to have Oberdorf move into a left centre-back position, which will prevent Chelsea from being able to put on any real pressure, even if Chelsea's 5-2-1-2 /4-4-2 press were able to try and push up on the near side, which they tended to do. So for example, if the ball was going to come out towards Rauch on this left hand side, Cuthbert would be really quick to try and get there and try and immediately press her. But with Cuthbert pushing high up on that right hand side, that forces Wrighton to drop into a proper left back position and tuck inside as well. So that creates a lot of space far side, which is what Wolfsburg are looking to try and punish. So unlike the first 20 minutes or so of the game, at this point Kerr has dropped to more of a right midfield position during these presses, whereas earlier in the game she'd be much higher up. And I'd even go so far as to suggest that leaving Kirby and Kerr high up whilst Chelsea were in the defensive formation, the 5-2-1-2, with Harder being the one dropping into like a CAM role during this out of possession phase, leaving them up for those long balls in behind did actually cause Chelsea a lot of problems because of the positioning of Huth and Ruud, because Ruud would constantly push over to that right hand side and they would overload that side, and the lack of numbers in midfield made it really difficult for Chelsea when Wolfsburg then spread the play and moved it more to a central part of the pitch, because you'd had Leopolds and Ingle move across towards that side, leaving a ton of space centrally. So we see Wolfsburg circulating around the back. You've got Overdorf who's moved into that left centre-back position, whilst Latvine has taken up the position as a CDM. They circulate it and then they move the ball quickly over Chelsea's press as Chelsea try and cover back across. Okay, so you have the right back Vedemir, and she's pushed high up on that right hand side, and similarly on this left hand side Rauch was really aggressive too. As I mentioned, Ruud in that 2-4-2-2 deep build up liked to drop a little bit deeper. That allows Wolfsburg to be able to potentially play through the lines, but then by leaving Van der Sanden higher up on that right hand side, she was always an outball. Her and Wasmuth were constantly looking to try and get in behind, try and take advantage of how aggressive the wing backs for Chelsea would be. So we see that here in the aggressive position of Wrighton, the left wing back. The knock-on effect of Wrighton being this high now means that you've got Van der Sanden versus the slightly slower Eriksson potentially in that right hand side channel. On this occasion Eriksson wins the ball, but there was that space that we're talking about in behind the wing back of Chelsea where potentially Van der Sanden can find some space. Note Ruud's position, again we're going to see this later too. She's constantly moving narrow, constantly looking to try and overload this side of the pitch, and Rauch would be tasked with maintaining the width on this left hand side. So she would push up in possession, and that would also put her in a good position to try and counter press. Speaking of counter press, you can see that happening here on this right hand side as the Wolfsburg attack breaks down. I assume Wolfsburg's counter press contributed to Chelsea playing quite as vertically as they did, but I think it was a little bit abnormal just how quick Chelsea tried to play through the lines or play over the press. Speaking of Chelsea's verticality is in stark contrast to Wolfsburg's style of play, because they were a lot happier to try and pass it through the lines. So despite Chelsea getting as many players as they have near side to try and really box Wolfsburg in off this throw in, Wolfsburg try to overload this side. Again, note that this is Ruud. This is your left winger who would typically be in a more attacking position, maybe slightly tucked in, but she's literally in a cam position or a right CM position. Wolfsburg saw an opportunity here, despite the fact that there were so many Chelsea players. Wolfsburg saw this as an opportunity to try and get into the space behind them. In this case, Ruud is able to play it back to Vedemir and she passes it into Latvine, and Latvine gets a little bit of luck. One thing to mention is that whilst Wolfsburg were looking to try and play through the lines, they were just as happy to try and hit it early and try and hit the likes of Van der Sanden or Wasmuth in behind. So there were numerous occasions in this game where Chelsea would hit it long and then there'd be a contest for the second ball, and then Wolfsburg would hit it long and then Chelsea would hit it long, and it would be kind of this back and forth, very attritional traditional style. In Chelsea's case, they do have a really good counter against the likes of Van der Sanden in the fact that they have Jess Carter as that central centre-back. Yep, so Wolfsburg are a little bit lucky and they're able to escape here and immediately look to switch the play to try and get it out to Rauch, the left-back, who is now in tons and tons of space because of just how narrow Chelsea's press was. This was your far-sided wide midfielder slash forward in this shape. This is your deepest lying centre defensive midfielder with the other centre midfielder much higher up the pitch. And here you've got your flying Dutch woman Van der Sanden flying up the right hand side in case they want to hit her early, running in behind 1v1 against Eriksen. Okay, so instead of hitting Van der Sanden with the earlier ball, they hit Rauch, but now we're going to hit Wasmuth. And part of what contributes to Wolfsburg's momentum is the fact that Jess Carter had to cover across to try and help cut out the pass into Van der Sanden, which then obviously draws Bright across as well, creating a ton of space for Wolfsburg to try and exploit here against the relatively slow right centre-back, who's been left exposed by the really aggressive wing-back of Chelsea. Again, this is something that we mentioned earlier. Wolfsburg looking to try and expose the wide centre-back of Chelsea as the Chelsea wing-back pushes up. We saw that also on the left-hand side as well. Of course, in Reiten's case, that was her trying to press off the throw-in, but regardless, they're looking to try and exploit those spaces either side of the wide centre-backs. Okay, so moving on to Wolfsburg's counters. Of course, given the way that the group was playing out, Chelsea became more and more desperate to try and get a goal. And if at all possible, were even more vertical in their play and committed more players up the pitch, which created a lot of space for Wolfsburg to be able to attack into, which Van der Sanden and Wasmuth didn't need a second invitation to try and take advantage of. We see that in this scenario on a Chelsea corner, but it was just as likely to happen in open play as well. Another means of creating these direct attacks was through the clever positioning of Huth and Ruud, whose movement between the lines was difficult for Chelsea to be able to pick up, and it allowed Wolfsburg to be able to play 1 and 2 touch and then get beyond the Chelsea lines of pressure and run directly at Chelsea's back line. Okay, so disclaimer, this is just after a goal, but I think it's still a good example because it shows Chelsea not really looking to try and play through the lines. Of course, at this point we've got G, so they are more equipped to do so. They were forced into a change in the back line with Nguyen stepping in for Eriksen. She moved into a centre-back position with Carter moving to left centre-back. But regardless, Wolfsburg have been able to pressure Chelsea into kicking it long from deep. Nguyen is able to connect with Reiten in this left-hand space with Kirby floating just in behind. Okay, so Reiten isn't able to connect with Kirby, but this gives you a good idea of how Chelsea were looking to try and attack. So we've got near side forward looking to combine with near side forward, whilst you've got far side forward here in Kerr available in case they want to try and switch it out to that side. So regardless of whether Chelsea's back line decide to play up this left hand side or up on the right hand side, Chelsea have an option there. And if Kirby had been able to connect with Harder, then you would have had the likes of Leopold as well as also the wing backs trying to get up to try and support their attack as well. Oberdorf is the recipient of Reiten's header and looks to drive into the Chelsea half. Big shout out to Oberdorf, she was quality this game. Again, this is Ruud. This is your left winger on this right hand side. Van der Sanden has run herself into the ground, so they replaced her with Bremer. And look again, she's looking to try and exploit this space because Chelsea have kind of just been caught in transition where their near-sided wing-back in Reiten has pushed up the pitch and now she's recovering. But then also you've got your left-sided centre-back, of course, quite quick in this case, as well as also your central centre-back quite quick in this case. But you can see just how split they are by the movement of Huth and Oberdorf. Moving on, Oberdorf is able to pass the ball back into Ruud, who tries to pass it onto Latvine, but the pass is intercepted by Harder. This is a good still to also show the counter-pressing position of their right back, and also Rauch trying to move into that left wing position to make up for the fact that Ruud, the left winger, is here near side. And finally, you've got your right wing back for Chelsea positioning so that if the ball is played out to Rauch, she can close that distance as quick as possible. Unfortunately for Chelsea, Latvine clatters into Harder, and Chelsea aren't able to take advantage of the fact that they've got players running beyond her, such as Leopold, as well as Kirby and Kerr. Chelsea take a quick free kick here and try to release Kerr on that right hand side. And I think this is just such a great example of how Chelsea were looking to try and get as many forwards into the box as possible so they could cross the ball in and try and contest aerial duels, but it simply was not working. Okay, so Wolfsburg's throw-ins were also a really great means of attacking Chelsea. We've got Wolfsburg set up in their 2-4-2-2 again, with Chelsea's very narrow press. So this is Kirby, your far-sided forward in this formation. And you've got Ruud dropping off the line, as we mentioned earlier. And Huth with her also kind of playing between the lines. Fortunately for Wolfsburg, Ruud is able to play a very subtle, very nice ball into Latvine and they're able to spread play. And again, Chelsea are heavily weighted towards one side such that when Wolfsburg are able to beat that press, there is just so much space to exploit. And we see that here with the run by Hughes, the layout to Van der Sanden and the relatively lucky goal. Okay, so we're going to move on to Chelsea's deep build-up. Again, I'd suggest having a look in the comments as well as the description down below for a more comprehensive tactical summary. Generally speaking, they rarely played short from the goal kick. Possibly with Musovic in goal, they were worried about her being pressed. Wolfsburg were really good at pressing both the centre-backs, but then also towards the goalkeeper whenever they had the opportunity in their 4-1-2-3 or 4-2-1-3 press. But the near-sided Wolfsburg fullback had a lot of flexibility pushing out, so we see that here. Chelsea are looking to try and play that long ball towards their forwards who are all clumped up on that left-hand side. Most of the time, Chelsea are looking to try and either hit Kerr or Harder with the long balls. On this occasion, they're hitting Kerr, and then the other two forwards are looking to try and combine or try and run in behind. The near-sided fullback, Wiedemeyer, dropped off to track Kerr, with the rest of the centre midfielders all covering across as well. Note Leopold's movement. Unlike Ingle, Leopold would constantly gamble throughout the match, starting in her CDM position and looking to try and burst beyond the forwards and be in the box to contest crosses. Yeah, the ball bounces around quite a bit here, and this is a good example of how bitty the game could be and how Wolfsburg and Chelsea would need to kind of fight for those second balls. With all the ricochets, the ball goes out for a Chelsea throw-in. Chelsea take their throw-in, they pass it back, it goes to Carter, it goes all the way back to Musovic, and instead of them being able to just set up again and start some deep build-up, Chelsea end up kicking the ball long due to Wasmuth pressing all the way towards the goalkeeper and Musovic kind of just waiting for the ball to get to her, and then the ball is basically turned off to Wolfsburg for them to be able to start another attack. So with regards to Chelsea's attack, I'd say that there were 3 stages or 3 styles. So we talked about the first one and the one used predominantly where you kick it long to the forwards and you hope that they pull off a little bit of magic. You play one good ball in behind and Kerr or Kirby combine for some easy tap in, and then from there Wolfsburg have to try and break you down and then you just keep capturing on them, which is Chelsea's typical strategy. And the second strategy was having G come on and provide more of a passing platform to allow Chelsea to be able to get those wing backs higher up the pitch into crossing positions or far side into the box to try and contest crosses. And then we have the last 10 or 15 minutes where Chelsea just forego approach play completely, and it became a 2-1. So you'd have Nguyen as well as also Bright as the centre backs with G just ahead of them. There would sometimes be some rotation by those centre-backs just to help G avoid the press of Wolfsburg. But all of Chelsea's players are looking to be as high up the pitch as possible so that when Chelsea look to try and do the deep cross from either Bright, Nguyen or one of the 2 wing-backs, I think by this point we had Cuthbert as well as Liam Charles playing in those wide areas, and Chelsea would look to try and get crosses into England, Kerr, Harder and Leopold and just hope that they were able to fire a volley or smash a header in. Unfortunately, unlike many of the other crosses earlier in this game, this tactic also didn't bear much for Chelsea. And with that, I've covered the main points, but again I'd invite you to have a look in the description as well as the comments down below for the comprehensive tactical summary. If you enjoy the video, please give it a thumbs up as well as sharing it on social media and consider subscribing. With that, we're out.